Hello and welcome everyone to Exposition, where we expose the lies and shine a beacon of light on the truth. I'm Hugo Vargas alongside my colleague,
Alejandro Galvan.
and today we're going to talk about U.S. agricultural labor shortage. So, I don't know if you've heard, but in recent years there has been a shortage of workers for agricultural type of work.
Oh, no, I haven't heard that. It's a shock, really.
Yeah, so in the last 20 years, the amount of agricultural labor or the agricultural workforce has decreased significantly, and it's affected a lot of North American companies or United States companies pretty drastically. Now, John Hawley, who's the senior director of government relations for the United Fresh Produce Association, he states that the agricultural labor shortage in the U.S. In 2012 cost farmers an estimated $1.3 billion dollars in lost income. That's a pretty penny right there, right?
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
That is a big chunk, and this is not affecting just a certain area or a specific area. It's all across the country that people are getting affected. And John Hawley, he states that he insists that it's only gotten worse since then. Now, this was back in 2012. We're talking about 7 years ago. Yeah. And what he's saying, hey, it hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse. And more than likely is going to continue to get worse, especially with the new policies that are being proposed by President Trump as well as his administration. Now, the reason why we have such a short labor force is, for one, you got the tougher immigration policies that are coming. Another thing is the current population of workers is getting older. So a lot of these workers, they're not able to perform some of the same jobs like climbing up the ladders and doing all these physical labor.
And you know what? If you think about it, it has to do with their children not wanting to do those jobs. You know what I mean? We didn't grow up wanting to do those jobs, even though we did them, but it wasn't something that we aspire to be. Like, I want to be the next, you know what I mean? We wanted to do something else, something better. And that's now that time is coming, or that time is here where our children are not going to be in the fields. There's not going to be a reason for them to be in the fields. We worked our way out of that type of environment, that type of work, because we qualify now that we're legal. We set our goals up much higher. So I think it's the children too that are not picking up what their fathers are doing, because what did the white supremacists believe that what was going to happen? That these kids were just going to continue to be picking cherries their whole life, not go to school.
Right, and I think that's something that they're realizing.
Yeah, and all our fathers and our grandpas, they're too old.
And right, and that's the other part of why there's a labor shortage, is because U.S. born citizens, they just don't want these jobs. These are not highly sought after jobs. Now, like I said, the labor shortage affects agriculture all over the nation. So you got cherry producers in Michigan, you got tobacco growers in North Carolina, sweet potato farmers in Louisiana, citrus and tomato growers in Florida. You got chili pepper farms in New Mexico, potato and onion in New York. You got grape vineyards in California. You got apple orchards here in Washington State.
And who's farming all these?
For a large part is the immigrants, and it's not just agricultural work that's getting impacted. You got other types of industries like livestock farms in Texas, as well as dairies here in Washington and Wisconsin that are getting affected as well. Now, in 2013, or from 2013 to 2014, the National Agricultural Workers Survey found that 47% of farm workers were undocumented. So again, it's what you touched upon. It's the immigrants that are doing these jobs. 31% were U.S. citizens, and 22% had work visas. Now, the total number of foreign-born immigrants that work these jobs during that period is 73%.
73%.
Talking about 3/4 of the labor force is foreign-born immigrants.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to give you an example of why there's been a labor shortage and the impact that it's had. In 2011, migrant workers, they avoided the state of Georgia altogether. And the reason is because they had these policies in place which were cracking down on undocumented immigrants. So they were having more ICE raids and things like that. So rather than risk being caught and being deported, a lot of immigrants, they just avoided the state altogether. And what ended up happening is it cost farmers there $75 million lost income due to the labor shortage. So it's impacting farmers greatly. Now, every one of the nations, here's a fun fact for you, right? Everybody likes fun facts. Every one of the nation's top 10 fruits and 7 of the top 10 most popular vegetables have to be picked by hand.
Yeah.
Right?
Because they're very delicate.
They're very delicate, and there's also a lot of variables that are involved with harvesting them. So not only, like you said, it's delicate, so it's got to be something delicate. You got to account for the ripeness of it. You got to account for the size of it. Also, you got to take into consideration that if it's going to rain, you're going to want to pick it right then and there. Even though it might not be as ripe as it should be, you're going to want to pick it because when that rain comes, it's going to end up ruining that crop anyways. So there's a lot of variables that go into it because they're trying. Yeah. They're trying. And actually, companies have invested millions of dollars in robotics automation research
so they can get rid of the farmer.
So that they can, but they can't. It's they're nowhere near creating adequate machinery to harvest these crops. And again, it's just due to the many variables that are involved so far as picking these type of crops.
Take that, technology.
Right. You're not going to get rid of the immigrants just yet, right? Now, California is by far the largest U.S. agricultural state with over $50 billion in revenue, agricultural revenue.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot of money, right?
That's a whole lot of money.
A 2017 survey, which was taken by the California Farm Bureau Federation, found that 55% of California farms had a labor shortage. That's more than half.
Yeah, that's more than half. No farmers, no cherries.
And again, it goes with these policies that are being implemented that are making it tougher on immigrants and causing a lot of them to get deported. So they're just not coming here. Now, 20 years ago, California, it was a different story for them. 20 years ago, they had a surplus of farm laborers. And the reason why is annually you had 100,000 people, foreign workers coming from Mexico into the United States. And at that time, these workers that would migrate yearly, they accounted for 25% of the labor force. Today, they account for less than 2%.
Less than 2%.
Right. And so these are the people that were coming in and migrating annually. Now, a study by the Pew Research Center estimates that 1 million Mexicans and their families left the U.S. and returned to Mexico between 2007 and 2016. So you had a exodus of Mexicans during this 9-year period.
Another migration.
A big migration, and it's for the same thing. It's not worth it for them to come over here, especially when they're paying thousands of dollars to someone to cross them over just to get deported. So they're, a lot of them would be losing out at that point. Now, we're going to get into some of the figures for the salaries that these immigrant workers make. What do you think? You think it's pretty high? They're making the big bucks?
Oh, no. They're not making the big bucks.
Not exactly. So the U.S. Department of Commerce compiled data on salaries for farm workers, and they found that the average annual income for all farm workers, $17,400.
A year?
A year, yeah. That's the average annual for all the workers. Now,
and imagine there's people who buy cars that are $20,000 worth. You know what I mean? That's more than what some of these farmers make. in a year, and it's just crazy.
It is the U.S. poverty line is 12,400.
Man,
So they're just barely above poverty,
barely.
and actually, to get more specific, uh, almost half of them make less than 10,000.
I mean, I believe it. I mean, I grew up in a home where it was just my father working the fields. There were six of us. We weren't. I mean, there was probably one of us receiving benefits, but it wasn't everybody. But
Right. And then another thing, especially in California, you got such high rent prices that it makes
it's ridiculous. Like $1,500 for like a 1-bedroom studio or something.
it's cost effective. I'll give you an example. Salinas, California, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, you're looking at 24,400 per year. So again, these people, they're averaging 17,400, right? If you got two parents, that you're looking at about 34,000, 35,000. So you're making about $10,000 for extra after paying rent to pay your essentials, right? I mean, you got to survive. You got to get food. You got to get gas. You got to pay the electricity, the water, things like that. So what happened is this forced a lot of families to pack into small houses like sardines. Sometimes you had 2 to 3 families packing into these houses just to make it affordable for them. So they're not exactly.
And everybody in that house was working or doing something.
So you got to contribute somehow.